All right, this is September 10th, 2024 at 6 p.m. The time set for the Planning and Zoning Commission work study session. I'm Michael Faith. I'll call this meeting to order. The agenda and packet are available on litchfieldpark.gov. The video recording of this meeting can be seen 24 hours after the meeting. If you'd all join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, on to our business. First item, well, that's much better. Zoning code text amendment signs. Presenters Randy Proch. Take it away.
Chair, Commissioners, good evening. This is a work study session on the sign code. We have a plethora of things to talk about. Because this is a work study session, feel free to interrupt. Let's chat through a number of things. There's a lot of things to cover, but this is for your benefit to ask the questions. We look forward to presenting a formal recommendation in the near future, maybe even next month, for adoption or recommendation for adoption of a sign code amendment to code. The story tonight is regarding Good News Community Church. Clyde Reed, R-E-E-D, is who you see with his wife on the screen. They are a pastor and wife of Good News Presbyterian Church in Gilbert, Arizona. If you've heard this story before, great. If not, I'll go through the story. They were a floating church of sorts. They met in schools or other places every week was a new address. So they had these signs, little coroplast plastic signs with H sticks, think of realtor signs or yard sale signs that they would put out in the city right of way in the town of Gilbert to direct patrons to come to their church. What Gilbert called this was a temporary directional sign related to a qualifying event. A little wordy, but it stated as such, the temporary directional sign could be no more than 6 square feet and could only be displayed only 12 hours before and 1 hour after the qualifying event. Essentially, the night before or the morning of, they would have their patrons go out, place all these out. As soon as church service was over, had to go and pluck these away. What happened was they filed a lawsuit against the town of Gilbert, arguing that the restrictions on their type of sign was more restrictive than an ideological sign, which is the one above, or a political sign, which is the one below. At the time, there was 6 square feet allowance for his type of sign, but if the message was different, 20 square feet for an ideological sign, or another way to say that is non-commercial. Saves the planet, don't fuel during the day, fuel after 3 hours, whatever the case may be. And the greatest allowance was for political signs. This went all the way up to the Supreme Court decision. The town lost. They sided with the church. It was known as Reed versus Town of Gilbert. And essentially what was stated was the town went too far as having content-based laws. Essentially, they're under the strict scrutiny requirements of the First Amendment freedom of speech. So the scrutiny is as follows. The government must demonstrate that the law has been narrowly tailored, to serve a compelling interest. And what Gilbert thought was that these kinds of signs are essentially unaesthetic and should be limited, should be sized appropriately to not block any traffic concerns as far as you should be able to see around the corner, making a turn. And they didn't feel the same about ideological signs or political signs. I'll pause there. Any questions about what you've heard so far? Is this new information for everyone, I hope? Okay. How does this affect us? All cities must conduct a 2-step analysis of the code. Does the ordinance language refer to the content or message of the sign? If not, is there evidence showing the city adopted the regulation specifically because of disagreement or agreement with the message expressed? Essentially, we have to be content neutral. The easy way to remember is that cities cannot read signs to determine the allowances prescribed. What this means for us is we need to do a text amendment. We need to do a text amendment immediately. To be open with all of you, this happened in 2015. Why my predecessor, his predecessor, her predecessor, his predecessor did not bring this before you, I don't know, quite frankly. Essentially, we are out of federal compliance, which is a big deal and needs to be rectified immediately. So any of our definitions or standards that regulate or prescribe content have to go. Political signs are governed by the state. It is not something that is any benefit to us at a local level to prescribe what can and cannot be done with political signs. That's a state statute issue. The other part of this is commercial versus non-commercial. What I mean by that is if you have a yard sign that says congrats class of 2024, or I say for sale Girl Scout cookies being a commercial message, you're selling something. Class of 2024 is more that ideological sign, just congrats. Being able to allow one and not the other means you have to read the content. Again, you can't read the content of the message, so it's a very tricky situation. General way to go about this is if you allow the commercial speech, you allow the non-commercial speech. You just put yourself out of whatever it states. The last part of this is something to keep in mind also is flag content was also affected. You cannot regulate the type of flag someone flies. If you allow flags to be flown, it's any flag in that regard. Pause once more for any questions or thoughts. All right. I went through our code. We have a few definitions and a few regulations that are very specific on content. I'll highlight this just for your edification and for mine. Awning, and I'll highlight just the key parts of this. We prescribe that the name and or logo of a commercial business is prescribed on that awning. That's federally incompliant, let's call it. Non-compliant? I think non-compliant is the better way to say that. City, church, civic organization, you're stating that these particular users have different regulations. Probably something we would like to avoid, especially with you're calling it a temporary sign, or I should say we are calling it a temporary sign, but then you're selling it as a special event. Those are types of things that are usually independent instead of one or the other, or I should say being one or the other. Contractor or subcontractor, temporary sign which identifies the firm, again, prescribing content, what it says and does not say. And frankly, I was surprised that this was something we even regulate. If someone wants to put up Aiken Gardner construction, why we regulate that or want to define that, I'm not sure. It is of no benefit to us as far as getting to that level of weeds. We do that somewhat similarly with development sign. These are things that we have on the books today. I'm not sure if this is something we would want to think about, but again, these are in existence because they talk about what it states, which again, we cannot do. Garage sale, yard sale. This I know is a big deal for our city council and was a lively discussion about how to do this. I'm going to split this in two. We can still regulate garage sales and yard sales as far as frequency. That's you using a residential property for a commercial business. That's use of land. The sign, however, is trickier because the only way you know it's a yard sale sign is, again, if you read, it says yard sale. If I say open house, or if I say new homes being built 3 miles ahead, they should all be content neutral, meaning if you allow one, you allow all of them. If you don't want to allow one, then you can't allow any of the other examples of this kind of sign. Identification, the name only says the name of the business, no additional message. Again, that's not something we want to pick apart and try to regulate over just having a monument sign or a sign on your building. Ideological, as discussed, non-commercial message. Open house, same as yard sale, same as new homes ahead. These are all things that are based upon what it states. Lastly, political sign. This is one I'm recommending that we just scratch. Let the state statutes handle these sorts of things. It's not something we want to regulate or define. State statutes handle all of that. before we go further on standards, is there any questions about the definitions that we've discussed? I'm hoping your silence is of shock and awe, or you're just hoping to see part of the debate after we are done here tonight. I'm not sure. Standards. These are situations where we have previously prescribed what can and cannot be done on these types of signs. For example, and I apologize, that's small. I can enlarge it for you. I'm going to go down the bottom to prohibited content. No advertising of daily, weekly deals is allowed. This is something that is in direct violation, again, of federal law. Now, if for the past 9 years, is that Mary? For the past 9 years, no one's been regulating this anyways. I hope that's the case. If someone has been regulating that, we would have an issue. Monument signs for non-residential uses within a residential district. Again, I'm just gonna lose my screen here for a moment, I suppose. Go down to content, may include the name and hours, shall include addressing, no advertising. Is that me or you? You know, I had some dry runs with DRB, this shouldn't happen with all of them. Oh, I've got plenty of battery. Was it you? Okay, moving forward. Awning size, again, right in the middle, content, name or logo shall not include any additional advertising. Monument sign at the bottom, name or logo of business shall include address. Shingle, name, logo or business, no additional advertising. Umbrella, name, logo or business, no additional advertising. These are all things I'm somewhat surprised we regulate umbrellas. Whether it says, you know, Joe's Barbecue, Tom's Pizza, whatever the case may be, I don't know that this is something that we want to regulate to that level. I mean, do we talk about the maximum number of umbrellas that can have advertising versus not having advertising? Should we consider this a nuisance or blight on the city? Shingle, monument, awning, these are things that are usually attached to the building. Monument is freestanding. That makes some sense. But again, I'll pause as far as any thoughts. Go ahead.
Did you say that we can't regulate the address being on a monument sign? Is that?
So, Chair Faith, Commissioner O'Connor, I'll preface that by saying whatever the fire department wants, the fire department gets. So if there is a situation where the Goodyear Fire Department, who is our fire provider, says you have to have orange letters that have the address number on the building, that's independent of sign regulations. What I mean by that is if there was a max amount of signs you could have in the building, that doesn't count. We don't think of that one. That is independent. That's not something we would want to regulate. That's a fire code requirement. Additional questions or thoughts? Okay. So what can we do? Talk about the type, quantity, size, placement, lighting, digital signs, permanent, temporary, materials, design, visibility. I put an asterisk on that. We'll come back to that later. That's a little foreshadowing, I guess you could say. Placements, also a little bit curious as far as you have freestanding signs, which means the one you see on the corner of the site. Building signs, it's on the building. Wall signs, it's not on either. It's in a sort of a situation like Litchfield Greens, where it's not on the wall of the community. It's a somewhat freestanding one. On premise and off premise. What this means is if you're in a commercial center and you're the back corner of the site and that's your parcel, and you put a sign on the road, well, that's someone else's land. How does that work? Should you be permitted to do that or not? Well, what if you don't have permission from that landowner? Can't really solve that issue at a city level because it's a civil matter between property owners. But if that center has multiple tenants on a sign, maybe there's an opportunity there that you can have that visibility. The other one on the end, there's ROW, right of way. We need to be very cognizant about what's on private property versus what's on our public right of way. So if we allow a sign that may say something to the effect of golf course turn right, Red's restaurant turn right, and that sign is in our right of way, if we permit that sign, it could have Chair Faith's house 12 miles that way. Because again, we cannot read the content of the message. If you allow signs in right of way, then that sign could, in theory, state whatever it wants to state. That is not something that we could have an opinion about or deny based on what it says. One caveat to that, there are limitations of freedom of speech. If it is something that is so obscene or explicit, yes, there are limitations of freedom of speech. So you couldn't just have a string of curse words and call that a sign. Hopefully that makes sense. Moving forward.
Yeah, sorry.
Go ahead.
When you say it's in the right of way, so you're saying that the city has a sign in the right of way, or are you saying that a private owner had a sign in the right of way?
Sure, Commissioner O'Connor. In this instance, I was alluding to the sign from Wigwam. Wigwam has a sign in our right of way. Was it always our right of way? I don't know. A lot of the Wigwam was private development, and then we've obtained right of way because even the sidewalks, the landscaping was all there. So was it on private property? Probably. And we've taken right of way from there. But we'll get to it, but the government can always have signs that it deems appropriate for governmental use. City of Litchfield Park, speed limit 25. Those sorts of things aren't regulated in the same manner. Some of that has federal mandates as far as speed limits and that sort of thing. Other than that, there can be governmental messages. If you're on Dysart and you're leaving the city of Litchfield Park and you go into Avondale, they have those very vibrant green and purple signs that talk about like EMCC. Those are governmental speech in that regard. They're used for wayfinding purposes to direct people. We have one on Litchfield Road that says city library this way, city hall this way, the little hoop sign as it were, governmental message, we're fine to do so. Other businesses like Wigwam that may or may not want to go in right of way, we need to be very cognizant of, is that something we would want to do or not want to do? If they hit our sprinkler line in our grass, well, what happens then? Is that something that we would want to have or not want to have? It's one of those things that if you allow one, you allow all.
So right now, we don't allow someone to be in our city-owned right of way.
That's correct.
Okay.
They're just the Wigwam example that probably wasn't
Grandfathered in. Okay.
What can't we regulate? Different allowances based on message. Talked about this a little bit earlier. That's a non-commercial message. You only know that because you read the sign. You can't read the sign. So yard sales, house for Girl Scout cookies, grad 2025. You have to either allow yard signs or don't allow yard signs. You cannot limit words. So if one says hours 6 a.m. to 7 p.m., the other says CBD oil here, you cannot approve one, deny the other just based on what it states. There's a lot of things that this kind of ties into, and these are things that have been brought up before this commission earlier. So to all kind of comes together tonight, except for historic preservation. We'll talk about that again some other time. Murals, government signs, which we talked about, electric messages, or electronic messages, should state them. Commercial vehicles, banners, and window signs. I'll paint a picture. Pun intended, excuse me. This is a mural. We all know it's a mural. Looks like a mural, talks like a mural, walks like a mural. Is it artwork or is it advertising? Is it a commercial messaging or is it just decoration? I say that because It's a wonderful picture of the Colonel. Is that a mural? Is this a mural? You could argue either way. The only way you know that it's a commercial message is because you're looking at the Colonel saying, oh, that's related to a business. The easiest way to go about this and what staff would recommend to you is that murals would be considered the same as a sign. It's really a very fine line between advertisement and non-advertisement. If a building had bamboo shoots and a panda on it, you would think, oh, that's a nice message. But if the building was Panda Express, do you suddenly have a different thought about it? Because, oh, that's not artwork anymore, that's advertising. It's a real tricky situation. The most common thing done across, the Valley cities, and the good news is this is a federal case. So all cities and all jurisdictions in the entire United States had to change their code in 2015. We're a little late to that game, but the most common and relevant example is murals or signs. It's real tricky to say that it's commercial versus non-commercial message. Questions about that? Yes.
How have we been categorizing these things? Because I know you mentioned that we haven't really dealt with signs, but I know a few years ago,
Yes.
there was an issue in Litchfield Park among some residents, and I brought it to the attention of people, some other staff members, and basically the response was that the signs were sort of categorized under different areas. So how have we been dealing with it? Because I mean,
Yeah.
we obviously haven't just been completely ignoring this, and I know that there are restrictions that are in place related to displaying signs, but maybe they don't necessarily fit into the current guidelines. But what have we been doing?
So Chair Page, Commissioner Alvey, the easiest answer and the unfortunate answer is CSP. Comprehensive sign plan, comprehensive sign program, some comprehensive sign package, depending on your jurisdiction, all mean the same thing. Essentially, a separate standalone document that creates its own standards and regulations.
What do we have right now? I mean, because there's obviously something in place in our code.
Yes, so we do have regulations in place for types of signage. The CSP allows a straying away from what we have prescribed. Essentially, it's like a PD overlay for zoning. A CSP redefines what's allowed. The unfortunate situation, and this will be a future discussion, is that so much of the city has prescribed separate standards from code. Rena and I have troubles every day when residents want to be successful in new development, new signs, new accessory structures, what have you. And we first look to the zoning code. Unfortunately, there are so many other documents, either PD overlays or development agreements that have modified standards that no longer reflect what's written. I say that as a parable to say, I don't have every comp sign package CSP inventoried and known to be able to answer your question.
So it's confusing.
Yes, that's a
Okay.
better way to say that.
Okay, all right. Because I thought that there was something that was, there are different areas in our code that sort of deals with different types of signage, even if it's not called signage. And
Mhm.
and even though it's difficult to find, I think that it is there, and
Mhm.
and it also maybe grants more control over signage displayed in some ways that maybe it shouldn't be, given this court case. But I don't think that our city has necessarily been negligent in this area, I just think. And I'm kind of wondering, like, what we currently have that can maybe be incorporated to make this problem go away.
Certainly.
And do you have a lot of recommendations here to specify? Because I mean, I'm seeing I have a lot of concerns with I realize that we can't hinder freedom of speech and tell people what they can and cannot have on their signage. At the same time, that can open a lot of things up to our city that we haven't necessarily had to deal with to this great an extent.
You're correct.
I see a lot of issues down the road if we don't have some sort of way of managing this. Other than basically, it sounds like we need to just kind of have a blanket thing and just let everybody do whatever. That's kind of the impression I'm getting so far. Maybe that's not an accurate evaluation, but
I'm assuming you're gonna have some recommendations as to how to move forward shortly.
So Commissioner Alvey,
okay.
Chair Faith, tonight is an introduction.
Okay.
There is no recommendations at this time. It's premature of me to do both in the same conversation because this is new information for essentially everyone. I would not go as far to prescribe your direction forward. This is for your benefit and for discussion tonight. Chair or Commissioner Alvey, to your other point about more conversations on Nextdoor based on what we can and cannot do, I would anticipate that as well, yes. The opposite idea is that we regulate to the level we're comfortable with. It is not a carte blanche approach. It is not a free-for-all. However, things like yard signs could state and would state, based on federal law, anything. Whether that's red or blue, whether that's congrats or Girl Scout cookies, any sort of those.
It's not what I'm really concerned about as
Okay.
much as the other more permanent types of signs that
So,
would be out there. So
Commissioner Alvey, if you're leading me to a glass of water, I'm not able to drink.
I'm sorry. Just, I just hearing this, it just brought back memories of a few years ago. And I know that we had some things that were in place at that time that were sort of, from what I understood at that time when I was discussing with people in the city, it was sort of put into place the way it was put into place. So we had a little bit more control over what was going to be displayed in our city, basically. And I'm just sort of wondering how this is all going to end up, but I didn't mean to interrupt your presentation and you just keep asking about questions and that was
Of
just a
course,
question.
absolutely.
So
This,
please continue, I'm sorry.
I appreciate the interruption. Commissioner O'Connor, one moment. Is there something specific you can give me so I can research that further for you?
I mean, just when the signage issues come up, which I think we have them actually pretty frequently in our city, there will be signs and I mean, I'll drive down the road and I'm like, oh my gosh, why is it there? I mean, from 6-foot cartoon characters in people's yards that will be there for 2 months at a time to, you know, just someone forgetting to take down, you know, signs for different advertisements or even open houses or things like that. And I think that we do need to have controls, but at the same time, I also think that we need to try to figure out how to do it in a way that we don't want to hinder people's freedom of speech, but we also don't want to give them total control. And I mean, I know that the way things have been written, it enabled us to have a little bit more control in some areas, but no control in other areas. And I'm just hoping that whatever is forthcoming is going to eliminate that problem. So I'm just anxious to hear what your recommendations are next month or whenever we
Certainly.
meet again.
Thank you.
So,
Commissioner O'Connor?
Yeah, she mentioned something that kind of triggered a question. And
Sure.
So what with the city triggers when a CSP is required?
So Commissioner O'Connor, for everyone's sake, maybe that's something more towards what code states today. Code today states any new development requires CSP. That's, so not to be completely ironic in this response to you as far as recommendations, I don't have any recommendations. I would give the opinion that every new development requiring a CSP basically tells everyone you can create your own standards instead of using our own. That's a really slippery slope as far as we've prescribed, we've protected ourselves to the extent we have. But if you're a new development, you write your own. You tell us what you want to do. If you want 50 feet tall signs for whatever reason, you can talk about it, you can prescribe it. That still goes before design review board. All CSPs go before design review board for review of that. However, you know, right now, everything is a CSP. It's basically saying, in other words, zoning doesn't matter. You're going to do a PD overlay instead. So you have almost what it generally is known as contract zoning. even though we have a general plan that prescribes land uses, even though we have a zoning code that talks about the character of neighborhoods, just do whatever you want anyways, because you're new. It's not good practice.
But CSPs do have limitations. You can't just put a 50, you can't say I want a 50-foot monument sign.
They do have, they have limitations about how far you can go, and I don't have that memorized, so I couldn't speak more eloquently about it. So no, it's not whatever you want, but the CSP by nature is intended to create custom standards. Saying that by default, everyone gets custom standards makes staff's job very difficult because the zoning code is essentially bunk. There's some random 1-page, 3-page document somewhere in a file that has the correct information instead of our code, which prescribes land development.
Isn't also the intent of a CSP, so there's continuity within a new development, so you don't have like random looking signs?
Yeah, great question. So you would see CSPs normally in a large commercial center. So that if you have, you know, the Fry Shopping Center has elements, I have it in an upcoming slide. It has stacked stone, then every sign would have stacked stone. So for a design element. If they're all beige, then if one's beige, they're all beige. That sort of continuity is the intent of a CSP. CSPs for every type of development. So if, you know, a good example, Take 5 Oil Change, now open, came in. The standalone, one business has a CSP instead of just following the CSP for that center, which is very peculiar to me as far as why would each pad have CSP instead of one pad for the center? That's the point essentially, is you just follow along with all of that. Normally a CSP would give a palette of options. You know, I'm gonna have my commercial centers this big. I want to sign every 300 feet. Individual pads can't have their own signs. They need to have a, you know, a tenant sign within a multi-tenant sign. Those would be typical examples, I'd say. So Take 5 as an example, having its own, you know, center is odd. Again, I don't mean to recommend, I just, for your question. Mural or sign? If you've been to this restaurant, that should be very clear what kind of food you're about to eat. Is it artwork or is it advertising? Does anyone know this restaurant? Okay, never mind. It's Raising Cane's. We don't have it. Government signs, it's the conversation earlier. Wayfinding traffic control are regulated by the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices. Federal document from Federal Highways Administration that's adopted by the state and then each city. These are things that we don't need to worry about. We don't need to talk about. We don't need to regulate. These are placed according to traffic engineering requirements and the safety of drivers everywhere. Electronic message. We don't allow electronic messages. How this is approved, I would assume, was a CSP. To our conversation prior, the CSP is not intended to permit prohibited things. What I mean by that is if our code says no, or our code is silent on the issue, putting it in a CSP does not automatically grant approval. I don't know if how this was considered when it was developed, but this is one of those things as far as if we're okay with this being a digital sign, then we're okay with all digital signs. I say that to tell you again that, you know, you go to a corner drugstore, it might say 89 degrees, 5:31 p.m. It might flash and say milk, $1.99. You've now gone from non-commercial speech to commercial speech. One was just telling you information. Now one is telling you to come buy something. So even if we wanted to call it, well, digital signs can be non-commercial. A lot of schools use this now. So if it says, congrats, class of 2025, you know, this Friday football game, non-commercial speech. It says yearbook for sale, bake sale this Friday. Again, now we're back to commercial message, buy something. So we have this here. Schools use them, drugstores use them, commercial centers use them. Again, I don't have a recommendation for you. appreciate any feedback you have. This is one that we can say digital only on price signs. I'm not favoring gas stations. We can regulate by use. Please don't forget that. We can regulate by zoning district. There's appropriately sized signs on a residential scale versus a commercial scale. We don't have freeways here, but freeways have very large signs. That wouldn't be the same sign size and type that you put in a residential setting. So you can look at this from a district standpoint, zoning district. We can look at this from a use standpoint as well. So if we were okay with a digital price sign here, but not for Walgreens, not for schools, we can do that. Is there any thoughts on that matter?
It's like the easiest way to regulate the signs would be just location. Just, is the sign in somebody's front yard? Is it on the side of a commercial building? Is it on, in a right of way? Is it, especially for Litchfield Park? Is that how most cities regulate their signage, based off of location?
So most regulate based on sign type.
Type, okay.
Yes, the type is a better de facto situation. So if you say entry monument, if it's a residential setting, oh, it's okay, it's gonna say Litchfield Greens, say the Village, it's gonna say Sunset Terrace. But you wouldn't have you wouldn't have a digital price sign for gas stations in a residential district, right? So you start with the sign type. It's regulated, it's appropriate in these districts. It might be something that you tier as far as monument sign, 6 square feet for residential, 20 square feet for neighborhood commercial, 50 square feet for community center, that sort of thing. As far as you do it the same way you do zoning. You allow some uses in C1, you allow a bunch of uses in C3. But anything is possible per se. You know, if there is recommendation from this group before I present a possible solution, I'd love to hear it as far as we prefer this way over another.
And to fully understand, and we don't have that at all set up in the current code?
The current code, I'll go back, looks similar to this. So in this case, monument sign, neighbor commercial has 24 square feet and 24 for a multi-tenant building, 24 square feet for single tenant, 60 for multiple tenant, again, because now we're going up in intensity with commercial and regional commercial versus neighborhood commercial. So there, it's not, if the look and feel of the current code is desired, then I would tell you that I would just present to you a red line version that removes anything that regulates content. Any definitions that are content-based would just be a strike through. If there's an opportunity to revisit the code to make it easier to understand, if there's an opportunity to not require a comprehensive sign package every time, there are other aspects of the code, and we'll get to it here in a little bit, besides just the Reed versus Town of Gilbert issue that can be and should be addressed. I want to make sure that as we present these work study sessions to you, we're not just looking to fix Scrivener's errors, fix federal law changes. There's opportunities to make this code more usable and easier to interpret and enforce. We're going to look at these holistically instead of piecemeal. I'll jump back. I'm going the wrong way, excuse me. Hopefully no one needs their Dramamine. Here's another example of an electronic message. This is not in our city, just for the record. This is just Owens World is the the anchor tenant there. There's a Chase Bank, a couple other things around there. I think the Wendy's. So again, Chair Fay, to your point, is this Litchfield Park? I don't know. I do not want to sway this body's opinion of the matter. Just want to present all of these sorts of things that are happening. Commercial vehicles. This came up, I think, earlier this year, March or so. This is another thing as far as if I work for an AC company and I drive my van home every night, it's a commercial vehicle. Is it intended to advertise or am I just driving to my house? Well, I'd say it's just driving to your house. So this might be one of the things as far as location, Chair, to your point. If this is parked at the edge of a parking lot, and you'll see this in other cities as well, they'll have regulations about intentionally looking to create more advertising by placing their functional or non-functional vehicles at the edge of parking lots to try and lure more people in, advertise. This is another one that's come up. I haven't seen this as much on the west side. You see these more Central Phoenix, East Valley. These are digital signs. I don't know why FHWA hasn't said that these are a terrible idea. Please do not put flashing bright trucks on the road that cause a distraction. There's a lot of cities that have different opinions about digital billboards. Some see them as opportunities, some see them as the worst thing. So this is another one where I would look towards peer cities for best practices that have been tuned and refined over the past 9 years to see if this is something that's easily regulated and easily enforced. Banners. We don't define or allow banners. We have a lot of banners. Here's a banner. Here's another banner that they put on the post. And then an A-frame sign in the landscape area, which is lacking landscaping. These are all things, I guess, curiosities for me. I'll show you some other examples. This one's down the street. This one's down the street. Not this one. This one. This is another thing as far as, may or may not care for the Diamondbacks. Can't, infer favoritism over one team or another. What it states. Here's another one. And these are things you may not be driving around thinking about all day. These are things that we need to consider. This is approved sign, approved sign. This is not. Now, you see a lot of these as far as we're hiring, $20 we're starting to pay. Those are things that, should that be part of the advertising or not? Should that be a temporary sign permit? Maybe the ones that are, have been a fixture, quite frankly, for a number of years. We've never enforced, but these are things that are not permitted. Questions about banners?
And so it's okay that we don't allow banners.
So
It's just like we can't allow banners and tell people what they say on them.
Commissioner O'Connor, it's okay to not permit banners. I would tell you there are some users in the city that may be putting up banners on palm trees right now for seasonal events. The other thing that we're doing is if you drove down Wigwam, you may have seen two guy wires going across with two large poles. We intend to have street banners. We don't regulate banners. Now we can claim government exception to the rules by saying that it's our street banners. But if we don't, if someone else wants to advertise on that street banner, it's tricky, quite frankly. So we don't need to allow banners. Banners are usually for some sort of temporary purpose, not a permanent fixture. Some of these seem, fairly permanent as far as how long they've been there, or quite frankly, sun faded. So we have regulations about the types of materials used for permanent signs. Vinyl isn't one of them. So it's not like that these folks could affix it to the building and call it a building sign, because it doesn't meet the intent or the character or the design, the quality of what we're after. That's something we can still regulate and should regulate as far as materials. So these are essentially all non-compliant and should not be there. it would be, it'd be unique if Litchfield Park outright said no banners in any circumstances. But again, any feedback you have as far as the duration or frequency that we should or should not allow banners, certainly appreciated.
And sorry, to clarify too, our code does say no banners versus where some things we don't have. And if it's not in our code, we then deem it as you can't do it.
Commissioner O'Connor, if I've misspoke, I apologize. Banners aren't stated anywhere. So in the sense that it's not prescribed as permitted, it's prohibited. We do have some section of prohibited signs, which is fine, but that's another thing as far as, we have a section 28 is our allowable uses. There's not a section 28B that says prohibited uses. If it's not stated, it's not permitted. That, there's always something new. Like when I was working at Buckeye, there was still a video rental store as an allowance, not a thing anymore, but it's still on the books in case anyone wanted to revive that. So I say that to tell you that once more, it's not listed whatsoever. It's just, so then it'd be prohibited because it's not permitted.
And is that seem like that's like the right approach to take from your perspective?
So I pose the question once more that I don't know of any other city that prohibits banners. Every jurisdiction I know of and have worked in, banners are a temporary allowance. So in general, I would, to your question, say that we should probably add language about banners. And if we want to create more direction about when and where they're appropriate, I would lean that direction, just for your question to me.
Okay, and there's not any way to like address things that aren't in a code.
The only way to address things aren't in the code is an interpretation letter. So anyone can, apply for an interpretation letter for those sorts of things. If there's always situations that, as an example, a Kuman Learning Center. Is that a school or isn't it not a school? Well, you may not allow school in a commercial center, but you allow Kuman. Well, what is Kuman? It's a professional service as far as advisement, like a tax advisor or, a real estate advisor or a business advisor. That would be an example of where an interpretation letter would come in. An interpretation letter would not come in the idea that it's just not there in code. We wouldn't want to be in a situation similar to CSPs or PD overlays where banners aren't written anywhere in code, but there's one golden ticket document somewhere that someone made an interpretation 5 years ago that said banners are okay. A better way to think about it is any interpretation letter is a future text amendment. Because if you had to interpret the code, that means the code was no good. If you need to write how to use the code, fix the code. Oh, one last example of banners, take 5. Again, currently not permitted. The comprehensive sign package that was presented and approved by DRB did not have those there. So those simply are not permitted. Window signs. This was that asterisk that was done earlier. Window signs are 20% of total window area. This is the center up the road. There are some windows that are opaque, quite frankly. Now, the idea of 20% of total window area is something called CPTED. It's an acronym which stands for Crime Prevention Through Environmental Design. If you create areas for nefarious activity, you'll get nefarious activity. If you create alleys without lighting, you'll have activities that are undesirable. The idea with windows is that you can see into the business. The business can see out. If a truck is about to careen off the curb and come into the business, you should be able to see that. The same way, you should be able to see into the business. Are you getting robbed? Is something happened? Is it on fire? Whatever the case is, this is very standard as far as you shouldn't be able to opaque and create a wall, essentially, instead of glazing. But the only reservation about that, I would say, is that there's a lot of conversation in a lot of other cities about signs that you can't see from right of way. If you can't see it from right of way, it's not advertising. I say that loosely because if you're driving by and you can't see it, who is it benefiting? What cause does it have? If you're in the center, you can certainly see these signs. And maybe there's an argument there as far as once you enter private property, we should still regulate the same as if we were not on private property. So if you were driving on the road versus driving in the center, why have different allowances? Either way is acceptable and an option to you. So I would tell you that these are examples that aren't permitted today and are an enforceable standard that we could start, knocking on doors and saying hello. Any thoughts on window signs? All right. Next steps. We'll create a redlined and clean version of the amended code to present to you and to council, your recommendation, their approval. If this is a lot of information, I hope it's a lot of information, please reach out to me, rpr.och@lincolnpark.gov. Call. We can talk about this again next month. This is a work study session, so there's no recommendation. This is simply an open conversation about what you think. If you don't have answers today, that's fine. You have answers tomorrow. Reach out. In the meantime, I will continue to be going line by line, looking at all of this, not just for content, regulations, and removal of anything that's not neutral, but also if there's anything that is unclear. The report at next month or the coming months will, talk not only about the what, but also the why. Because there isn't any reason for me to give you answers without having rationale behind it. That is the end of my presentation.
Does anybody have any more questions or general direction or discussion you'd like to have on the topic?
I guess I would like to see what other cities like Litchfield Park did in 2015 to amend their code to be compliant with federal law. I would imagine that this is a problem, or was a problem in 2015 for a lot of cities, as you said. I think that you can look at our code and see that it's restrictive in a number of ways. It was written in a way that there are sign uses that the people that wrote the code, not saying that we're this way today, but the way the code was written is it's restrictive. So how do other cities who are restrictive, that are similar to Litchfield Park, how did they handle it?
Thank you.
And thank you for looking at the code, because I've looked at the code before and it's a bit of a mess. And there's a lot of references in different sections that don't work with one another. So I appreciate the work that you're doing there.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was gonna say from 2015, it has been 9 years. There's gotta be a million cities that have went into compliance somehow. So we're not recreating the wheel. We're very late to this party. So there's gotta be plenty of examples out there, and hoping that you have some ideas or have seen how other cities have handled this, and probably rely on you to put together something that makes sense for what you've seen with the code.
I've lived this life several times.
Yes. Any other comments or questions? All right, and we'll move on. No need for an executive session. Last item is adjournment. I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Hearing none. This meeting is adjourned. This work study is adjourned.